Here we're going to take a look at how we can reduce or remove small blemishes in our picture using the spot removal tool. You can find this tool in the tool strip up above, and you can select this tool either by clicking on the icon or by pressing its shortcut key. The shortcut key is the Q key, and I remember that by thinking of quickly removing small blemishes. So quick removal, Q for quick. Well, either way, let's go ahead and click on this tool. When you click on it, you'll notice there's a drawer of options which opens up underneath. We have a couple of different brushes we can use, either clone or heal. Now, if you're used to working in Photoshop, you know that cloning, well, it's a little bit more like taking actual content from one area and putting it on top of another. It's kind of literal. Healing, on the other hand, there's a bit more blending or combining which happens. Rather than just something on top of another area, it kind of merges together. Next, we have size. Size, this is our brush size. We can change this by using the slider, or there's a handy shortcut you can use, which is left bracket key is smaller brush, and then right bracket key is larger brush. Opacity is all about how strong we want the retouching to be applied. In other words, do we just want to kind of softly minimize the blemish? Well, then maybe we'll use a low opacity. Or do we want to completely remove it altogether? Crank it all the way up to 100. The other thing you'll notice is that there are some tool overlay options you'll see here in the toolbar. All right, well, let's take a look at how we can use this tool. This particular photograph was captured when I had just purchased a brand new lens. And this was one of the first pictures that I had captured with it. I walked out of the camera shop, I took this photograph, and it made me realize, gosh, I really like this lens, and I like this picture. And so often when we look at our pictures from a distance, zoomed out, they look great. But then we zoom in. And many times when we zoom in, we notice things that we would have otherwise perhaps overlooked. And a lot of times in still photography, because an image is still, we notice these small blemishes. So we have to figure out how to reduce those or remove those. Well, here let's go ahead and zoom into this picture. Perhaps not to 1:1, that might be a little bit too far. Maybe 1:3 would be a nice view here so that we can just see this picture. Next, I'll press the spacebar tool and I'll reposition it to see if there might be any small little blemishes that we want to remove. Well, in this case, I see a few. And I'm going to go ahead and actually just move this a little bit more and press the spacebar to do that. Next, I'm going to press my left bracket key. This will make my brush smaller. You can also just press and hold that. You can see how the brush size is getting much smaller. Well, I want to remove this little blemish on the cheek here. Let me zoom in even farther so that you can see that. And it's just a little teeny blemish. So typically you want your brush size to be a little bit bigger than that spot. Also keep in mind, this technique works with any sort of type of blemish. Maybe it's dust that was on your lens or your sensor, or maybe it's a nature photograph and there's a little distracting element on a sandy beach you want to remove. Again, this works in all sorts of scenarios, not just with people. Well, I have my brush size, and what I'm going to do is simply click. Now, when I click, you'll notice I have two circles. I have the area where I'm correcting, that I'm removing the blemish, and then I have the sample area. I can click to move this, to change this. In other words, I wouldn't want this to be, say, over here on top of another blemish, because then it's going to bring that blemish into this area. So now we have two versions of a blemish, right? You want to make sure your sample area is on some good, clean content. In this case, right next door, and that looks good. Well, how else can we work with this? Well, what we can do is we can go ahead and just start clicking. And sometimes we can work with this just by clicking and hoping for the best, hoping that it samples a good area. If it doesn't, we can go ahead and move the cursor around. We can also press the bracket key to change our brush size if we want to work on smaller blemishes. And I'm just moving through the image here, just selecting small little blemishes that I think would be nice to remove. And let's say we get to a bigger one like this, and we click, and, well, that sample size and the correction size, it's just too small. You can change that by hovering over the circle. You'll notice the cursor changes, and you can increase the size of your brush there. You can also do that with this size over here. So we can change the size of the brush either way. Well, what if we notice that one of our previous corrections is too small? Say like this one right here. We'll click on it, and then those same shortcuts work. Again, we can change our brush size here, or we can go ahead and hover over this and apply that. Another thing that we can do is we can hold down the Command key on a Mac, Control key on a Windows. When you do that, you'll notice the cursor changes. It's now a plus. Well, with this, what I could then do is click and drag, and you'll notice it sets a little anchor point from wherever I clicked, and I can determine or define the brush size right here as I'm creating that little spot. And again, that's just kind of a handy little trick here. So again, you hold down Command or Control, set your point, and then click and drag out, and then hopefully it will correct that problem. Well, let's zoom out just a little bit here. I'll go back to this 1 to 3 view. One of the problems, of course, with retouching like this is that you all of a sudden have all of these little circles. And a lot of times you'll have a bunch of these. They'll be all over the place. I'll just add a few more to kind of illustrate how we'll clean up a number of different areas, because you want to be consistent with whatever type of work you're doing here in regards to removing small blemishes. And well, as you have those circles, that can be helpful to see where you worked, but it's also a little bit distracting, right? So we can hide those circles by going to our tool overlay. At the tool overlay, we can change the say to never. This will then remove all of the circles, so they're now hidden. And then we can flip this switch to see what the spot removal looked like before you did any work at all. So this brings back all of our blemishes, flip it again, and then those blemishes will disappear. Now here in this movie, that's going to be a little bit tricky to see, so I'm going to zoom into 100%, press the spacebar tool, click and drag to reposition, say over here on the cheek, and I want to bring those circles back so that we can see them. We have 2 small blemishes right there we removed, and 1 on the nose. Well, let's then turn those circles off. We'll go back to never, and then flip that switch. And what you'll be able to see is that the blemishes will come back. Here they are, 1 there and there, 1 over on the nose. And the advantage of doing this is that sometimes what I find is when you have those circles on, you can't really see what your edges look like. You can't see if the blending is actually any good. There's a quicker way to turn off the visibility of the circles, and that's with the H key. The H key will toggle between different views of those tool overlays, and you can see how those are being hidden or brought back by pressing the H key. Let's zoom out a little bit more so we can see that in the entire image. Here we go. We'll go ahead and press H once, press it again. You can see how it's bringing back the view. We also have another tool overlay mode, which is called Auto. And Auto is kind of interesting. When you hover off of the image, they disappear. But when you move your cursor onto the image, they show up. So it just gives you kind of a quick way to be able to show or hide those. And that's a really nice way to use the tool overlay. Again, of course, all of these tool overlay preferences, well, it's completely up to you which preference you use. I just wanted to share with you a few of them so that you know how to work with those. All right, well, once you've made all those adjustments, how do you apply or save them? What do you do next? Well, all that you need to do is to exit this tool. There are a couple of ways to do that. One way is to click on the tool icon. Another, to press the Q key in order to deselect the spot removal tool. And then the third way is to press the Done button in the toolbar down here. Well, it may be a good idea to use the Q key, just so you start to integrate that shortcut into your workflow. So that's what I'll do here. I'll press the Q key in order to exit out of that spot removal tool. And now we have successfully cleaned up some small blemishes in our photograph.